Chris Christie is now in the 2016 presidential race, and let's get our panel's perspective. Michael Tobin is joining us tonight as an independent political consultant. Dominic Carter returns, political journalist and author. Noam Bramson is the Democratic mayor of New Rochelle. He was also the 2013 Democratic nominee for Westchester County Executive. And speaking of county executive, Scott Vanderhoff, an attorney and former five-term Rockland County executive. And Scott, we'll start with you. How serious of a threat for the Republican nomination is Chris Christie after his announcement today?
Well, I think for New York State Republicans, we really don't back anybody we don't think can win, if that answers the question. The fact of the matter is he's got so much baggage, and I don't think nationally they're ready for him. Although he's sometimes very refreshing, oftentimes he can find himself tripping on things, and I don't think it's going to work. I think between he and Trump, it should be fascinating to watch them.
I would almost like to see a play-in round into the debate between the two of them. They face off against each other and the winner advances. Michael, who's the threat here? Who should be worried about Chris Christie being in this race? Or should anybody be worried about Chris Christie?
That's a great question. We were talking before in the green room about this because his strengths are characteristics and strengths of candidates who are already in that don't have the baggage he has. So taking on civil service unions, which is popular in some constituencies, well, Scott Walker has done that more with the degree of national attention that Christie doesn't enjoy anymore. In terms of being a moderate regional Republican, well, George Pataki does that, and he doesn't have the demographic advantage of a Marco Rubio or the institutional advantages of a Jeb Bush. So I would say nobody should really consider this a threat except for the column inches and press attention it's going to take every time something flares up in New Jersey. It's then going to be what Politico, CNN, at the Times, and other papers talk about, which means they're not talking about the other candidates.
And just one more question on substance, Noam. 30% approval rating for Chris Christie in New Jersey. Clearly some problems in the state, unemployment problems, credit downgrades, things to that nature. How difficult is it to seek further office when things aren't quite settled on the home front?
Extremely difficult. I mean, this is a guy who couldn't get elected dog catcher in New Jersey right now. That's not a basis for running for president of the United States. And the reality is Christie can be entertaining in small doses, but he doesn't wear very well because at the end of the day, he's all hat and no cattle. I mean, today he gave a speech extolling the importance of big ideas and hard truths, and yet he failed to mention even a single big idea or a single hard truth. And I think that kind of sums up Chris Christie in a nutshell.
So Dominic, and I'm hoping you won't hold back on this one, since you certainly haven't over the last few years.
Do you want me to be honest, or do you want me to give you the political answer?
I want you to be honest, but especially
I'll give you the political
his
answer.
style.
I'll give you the political
His style
answer.
could make waves in this field, couldn't it?
I'll give you the political
All right.
answer. And this is the nicest way I can say this. Most in the media are watching to see this train wreck that's about to come. That's the nicest thing that I can say about Chris Christie. Because the mayor is right. Great speech. And, everybody's been talking about the fact that he wasn't using a teleprompter, but it looked like he was using cue cards or something down to that he kept looking at. I'm just making that point. So great speech, but remember that television commercial with the old lady, where's the beef?
Yeah.
Okay, so what's going to happen? Okay, you're gonna put some reporters in their place. That'll play well based on polling. Media is not well loved, but as someone has been to Iowa and in New Hampshire, what's going to happen the first time you tell grandma to shut up and sit down? It's not going to play too well. And when reporters, if he starts getting traction, as he may, other Republicans, you think they're just going to let him do a cakewalk to the nomination? Or do you think they're going to talk about the problems in New Jersey? Train wreck waiting to happen.
I don't even think they'll start with that. They don't have to. He's not well known enough that they have to. I think he's running on ego that he had in 2012 when everybody approached him and said, "Look, you're the only answer for us. Please come." And I think I don't think he's missed the point that he doesn't have that popularity.
The New York Times Magazine, Sunday Magazine used to put him on the cover all the time. He got a profile. It felt like a month nationally in media outlets that matter, and you talk about him here all the time. And I thought a great speech in comparison was his victory speech when he won re-election in November 13. That was a great speech, and that was made for a national audience, and it felt like the next day all the air just came out of that balloon.
Well, and they're going to show the pictures of him hugging Obama, and they're going to talk about, he says, I mean what I say, and I say what, and talk about the pensions he promised to fund, and then he said he wasn't going to fund. I mean, he's already off on a track, I think, that's going to eventually.
He's also bored. It's tough to stay around.
Well, I suspect his window is closing. I mean, or may have already closed.
He's trying to change the narrative of what's happening on the home base. But again, to piggyback on the mayor's point, look at his numbers at home, Andrew. And you think that you can just mysteriously, with a 30% approval rating, run for the nomination of the President of the United States? And so I agree with you, County Exec. This is
But isn't it interesting?
ego-driven.
We're all talking about process, but the mayor was talking about substance, right? He said he actually didn't talk about any ideas. He didn't talk to foreign
there was
policy.
no- there
We
was no
won't shirk from
punchline.
our responsibilities, and we won't stand down. I don't even know what that means.
It means nothing whatsoever. Although when we say that it's an ego-driven campaign, it is fair to point out, I'm not sure that any of the campaigns are not ego-driven.
Right.
It takes a little bit of chutzpah to run for president of the United States, let's face it.
A whole lot of chutzpah, perhaps. Look, Governor Christie didn't focus too much on substance or his record in New Jersey, and I think we've given it the due deference on the panel tonight. Having said that, style can go a long way in making a candidate or making a campaign. I mean, Donald Trump is towards the top of the polls in New Hampshire. He's offering nothing except style. How far can style take you, especially if everybody else is guarding their answers and a Christie or a Trump come across as being less guarded and more freewheeling? I'll start with you, Mr. Mayor.
I think in a fractured multi-candidate field, where being second in the polls means 11%, that's what you meant with Donald Trump, I think it's possible for any of these characters to be flavor of the month. But as you start winnowing down the field and folks look at who can actually be president of the United States, then I don't think those kind of personal entertaining qualities are sufficient. People are going to look for someone who's serious.
And I think there's another issue here that really isn't talked about much. I think people want somebody they can like, that somehow they can identify with and that they feel they can like as an individual. Neither of those guys are people ultimately that you can really like once they start talking. I mean, I don't see how Trump gets away with what he does and have people say, gee, I think he's wonderful too because he's so rich. I mean, what's the point? I just think at some point people are going to vote not just for substance, which I think is important, but whether they actually like the candidate, whether he provides that gravitas that I think
And we
people are
saw
looking
that
for.
with Bush and Gore, looking back so many years ago. The idea that even though he says he doesn't drink, would you want to grab a beer with Bush or with Al Gore? And I think the answer always came back George W. Bush. But even looking at New York, which is a vast state of different regions, Western New York has more in common with Midwestern sensibilities than it does with what goes on in New York City and North Jersey and even South Jersey. So likability matters. I don't think he has it.
Well, I also think that breaking the mold to a certain degree matters, in that there's almost a cookie-cutter approach that a lot of candidates take. They're careful. They're trying not to step on a landmine. They're trying not to say the wrong thing or offend people, as opposed to style-oriented candidates like a Christie, like a Trump. They don't seem to care about if they step on a rail.
I think a little bit of that is contrived. I mean, he has a habit of going after people who are not particularly important to the Republican base. So it looks like courage, but in fact, he's not offending anyone who's important to his own political health. And look, the bottom line is there is no particular constituency for a Christie candidacy. You know, he's kind of, comparatively speaking, the moderate, and 4 years ago, he might have been able to make the argument, you might not like me 100%, but I'm the electable one. That argument is gone based on what's happening in New Jersey. So who on earth in the Republican field, or rather the Republican electorate, is going to be behind him?
I think the Christie boycott at Fox is ongoing. I don't know when the last time he was on in any sort of real way.
Andrew,
and that matters.
And let me just sum it up this way. For someone that may think that, I'm not being fair to the governor, let's keep in mind there is that little thing that's wide open called Bridgegate and the U.S. Attorney's investigation. That's not over yet. This U.S. attorney is on his game, and we don't know where this is going to go. We don't know who could turn and cop a deal at the end of the day. So the governor, this is a train wreck waiting to happen.
And there's still pension problems, the Port Authority, there's Sandy and some questions about how the money was spent and whether he misguided that. Very quickly before we get out, he seems to be pinning his hopes on New Hampshire. I mean, he's doing better in New Hampshire than he is in Iowa. And I think he's looking for a New Hampshire upset. Is he still in this race after New Hampshire? I'm going to go around the table. Michael?
Yes, he's still in the race, because to leave, just, with your tail between your legs just looks
He's got
wrong.
nowhere else to go.
Right.
Dominic?
Rudy Giuliani tried it with Florida. It failed for Giuliani. It's going to fail for Christie in New Hampshire.
Scott?
No, he'll stay in it beyond that. I mean, obviously, they all want to do well, but I don't think he'll drop out.
No?
No, but given his traffic management experience, he could make a great Secretary of Transportation in the Republican administration.
You know, I was going to come up with a punchline, but I can't top that one. Can't add anything to that. We'll take a break here on RFL. When we come back, coming off of a week with a lot of big victories, the president seems to be getting a big-time bump. We're going to explore that and what, if anything, the president can do with that bump next.